Fairmont Crest moved into the rainy season with winds carrying mist from the lake pressed against each stone step, making the rows of dark firs quietly bow beneath a gray sky like a giant curtain hiding buried sins. Isaiah appeared in that setting like a moving stroke of black. No noise, no spectacle. Yet every stride carried the weight of a man who had already crossed the border between life and ruin, between loyalty and betrayal. He did not come to Fairmont Crest for a retreat, nor to begin a smooth new life like a blank page. His presence was the result of a long chain of decisions in which every link connected to the casino that had nearly drowned Joey and dragged Vanessa into a spiral of accusations. Isaiah carried within him 3 keys, each unlocking a different hypothesis about his purpose. A mission handed down by cold hands in the dark with a list of people to probe in silence. An escape from his own past when those who once wielded him like a knife turned its point toward his throat. And a pre-drawn scheme in which he was merely the paving stone, ready to be replaced once his function was complete. Those 3 lines did not run parallel. They cut across one another in his mind, and each night the invisible joints tightened, leaving Isaiah unsure whether he still had agency or was merely following a route someone else had sketched in the taut, string-tight air of Fairmont Crest. Eva was like a rare late beam of sun, a thin light sufficient to make every shadow stir. After months patching the shards of her heart because of Tomas, she had learned to walk slowly, speak little, smile faintly, and hide the hairline fractures in her gaze whenever someone carelessly spoke his name. When she met Isaiah, she wasn't moved by glossy perfection, but by an unshowy confidence, a warmth not flaunted, and a cloud of mystery draped across his back like a thick coat, pulling her forward while making her step half a pace back in caution. The feeling of being cherished returned to Eva like familiar music drifting through a wall, and that alone frightened her. The more cherished she felt, the more keenly she understood she could lose it again. Many assumed Eva softened because of Isaiah's looks, but the truth was more intricate. She recognized in him a structure akin to her own, the architecture of someone both strong and easily shattered, a soul once wounded now wearing composure so no one would see the hollow in his chest. Her fixation on Tomas had once made Eva equate love with conquest, and after failing to win his heart, she feared her own would chase any enticing signal. But Isaiah wasn't a passing signal. He was more like a spare logical sequence in which every gesture had a cause, every silence contained a message, and that hard-to-grasp order made Eva want to read the entire map of him. Even so, the closer she drew, the more blind corners she found. Isaiah dodged questions about his past the way one avoids known sinkholes. He veered away whenever Joey or the casino came up, and sometimes his lips pressed tight in a strange way, as if memories surged to break free, but he pinned them down with iron discipline. To the perceptive, that unease was the trace of shame. To Eva, it was a warning that behind his warmth were locked layers. Where had Isaiah been the night the cash reconciliation system was tampered with? Whom had he seen push toward the marshland behind the casino's windbreaks? Through a string of long nights, Eva combed through unfinished news items, lists of contract staff, shipping invoices stamped at the wrong time, and calls from masked numbers. All of it sketching an image of an Isaiah who wasn't merely a latecomer, but who had once stood at the rim of the ring of manipulation, close enough to hear orders, far enough to leave no fingerprints. That was why each time she brushed the phrase "the casino," Isaiah reacted like a man called out in a cramped room, tugging his coat, dropping his shoulders, then changing the subject with an unrelated anecdote. At Fairmont Crest, every evasion has a price. The more you dodge, the higher it rises. The tense night arrived like a foretold calamity beneath a sky heavy with clouds, when Isaiah chose to sever the chain of silence with a confession. He acknowledged Jacob Hawthorne as a brother by arrangement, not bound by simple blood, but a link in a financial-political alliance that had tethered them for years. His revealing that secret the first time he opened his past to Eva wasn't an impulsive outburst of feeling, but a calculated trade. He chose to disclose part of the truth to keep control over the rest, hoping Eva's trust in that moment would provide a buffer if everything blew apart later. He explained he had come to investigate a string of deaths and financial holes tied to the casino, to track those who dragged Joey to the bottom and built a wall of suspicion around Vanessa, and to determine how many links in the betting and laundering network bore the name Hawthorne. He admitted he had once worked for the power that nearly destroyed Joey and Vanessa, at first to repay a life debt, then out of fear upon witnessing how they snuffed out anyone who resisted, and finally because he trapped himself in a vow to crack their gears from within. Choosing to tell Eva then was, at bottom, an attempt at redemption laced with risk. If she left, he would lose the last emotional anchor he still had. If she stayed, both of them would be thrust into the eye of the storm. Eva's shock didn't burst into predictable anger. It spread like cold water seeping into a mountainside, making heavy earth slick. She understood that when a man brings darkness into your life, that darkness will find its way across to you. Within days, signs of threat took shape. An anonymous email reminding her of nights near the gate of the old casino. An unmarked envelope with telephoto shots of her and Isaiah. A work meeting suddenly moved to a bar run by a manager once suspected of aiding the ring. These small needles didn't kill, but they punctured peace. Eva realized that Isaiah's confession, however sincerely meant, had turned her into a new nail on someone's target board. She stood at a crossroads. Retreat to save herself, stay to test her faith, or step straight into the prohibited zone to rewrite the outcome herself. While she waited, the memory of Tomas returned as a brief lesson. Once, she misread a man, and the price was sleepless nights. This time, should she continue, the price would exceed insomnia. It could be honor, work, even life. Joey and Vanessa's responses swept across Fairmont Crest like two opposing winds as whispers of Isaiah's return spread. Joey, who had learned to distrust anything that brushed the casino, tightened his security ring, audited staff, changed travel routes, and rechecked suspended ledgers. He understood that network's operating logic and knew if Isaiah truly pulled away, the darkness would try to draw him back by any hold they could find. Vanessa, attuned to subtle mutations of risk, looked at the wider tableau. Isaiah's return wasn't just the past circling back. It signaled a restructuring, a shuffling of pieces by those seemingly dispossessed. She sensed the threat to Eva at once, because in every criminal equation, the unshielded person is the easiest point of entry. Quietly, Vanessa layered protections around Eva without announcing it, tapping her own leads in law and audit, reading intent from movements buried in financial data that most eyes would miss. Meanwhile, Jacob Hawthorne became the junction where every vector of conflict converged. His arranged brotherhood with Isaiah was a current that could either save or kill. Jacob knew the names of those who could order a person erased from the books without a trace, the back doors in accounting once used to push illicit transfers through intermediary wallets, and the behavioral patterns of each link in the betting chain. But knowing doesn't equal control. Jacob bore an old debt to those who had built his chair, a debt payable only with silence or a calibrated sacrifice. With Isaiah's arrival, the people behind Jacob understood his loyalty could skew. They sent a veiled message by making an old subledger tied to hospitality advances at the casino vanish, replacing it with a suspiciously pristine one. Beneath the adjustment lay a reminder that everything, Jacob's past and future, sat in their hands. On this board, one small mistake could topple the game, and that mistake came sooner than Jacob expected. A handwritten note by a former accountant surfaced on an old storage drive Isaiah traced, showing a transfer chain through a shell company sharing its name with a charity Eva supported. Innocent association turned into a double trap, binding Eva legally while shaming Isaiah with guilt if he pushed further. Pressure rose like a lake swelling silently behind a dam, unseen by the naked eye, yet already past the safety line. Eva was forced into a public choice when a local paper received documents about that murky financial tie and prepared a multi-part investigation, overseen, ironically, by an editor once socially acquainted with Tomas. The leak triggered a ripple effect. Donors began to withdraw pledges. A few of Eva's contracts were put under internal review, and those who had smiled at her at galas now described her as naively complicit or knowing yet involved. Isolation closed in, the moment when people are most prone to instinctive decisions. In a weary instant, Eva considered leaving Fairmont Crest, unplugging from everything, letting the storm seal itself behind her. Yet at that threshold, she began to discern the scaffolding of a setup. By dipping her name in dirty books, someone meant to force Isaiah to choose between his mission and the woman he loved, and either choice would cost him the other. It was an old game of the old power, upgraded with finely forged data. That recognition shifted Eva's course. She didn't retreat. She decided to follow the financial chain to its end and pry open the latches tightened around her name. Isaiah now had to face the question he dodged from the start. Did he come for a mission, to run, or as part of a coded design? What was happening to Eva pushed him to the boundary of truth. If he was merely an operative, he would put the file on his handler's desk and receive the reward of silence. If a fugitive, he would drag Eva with him to another city and hope the network tired. If a conspirator, this was the moment to reverse the hand and pour ice water over their script. He chose a different version of the third path, to warp the conspiracy by publicizing part of the network before they could recalibrate, using the data they forged to model the forgery, and reconstructing the money map with original, time-stamped evidence. The decision forced his enemies to pivot instantly. No longer content to muzzle, they aimed to destroy credibility, turning Isaiah into a paranoiac in the public eye, and Eva into living proof of an illicit liaison. Anonymous accounts spun up, an independent audit was salted with intermediary data, and an old witness suddenly remembered in ways contradicting prior statements. The air thickened until even footsteps in the gardens of Fairmont Crest echoed with surveillance. Within that tightening ring, Vanessa made a bold move. She refused to withdraw and instead leveraged her industry ties to set up a public audit forum where data had to be cross-checked under multi-party supervision, forcing the manipulators to reveal their intervention patterns by accident. Joey, who understood the casino's dark mechanics better than anyone, kept his distance just enough to protect and to cut loose if necessary. But he supplied Vanessa and Isaiah with a long list of microtransactions bearing the number slippage signature once seen in chip exchange laundering. Deeper still, Jacob quietly chose the side of truth in an unpredictable way. He let slip a technical note only he possessed. It wasn't enough to indict, but it pointed to a back door in the storage system that needed inspection. It was a tacit confession, an initial redemption, and a spark tossed into a granary. One small datum that could force the entire archive to be unsealed. Once the seals cracked, no one knew what else would surface beyond the original target. Jacob's risk now was the risk of seeing his own name somewhere inside, and he accepted it as the price to slip the old noose. The climax ignited on an evening that seemed peaceful when Fairmont Crest held a charity gala, warm light softening every face. Cameras panned quickly, ritual smiles bloomed, and through that stream of people Eva moved like someone newly awakened from a bad dream. A small chime sounded in her handbag, and the screen lit with 3 fresh photos. Her on the stone steps with Isaiah, her entering the records room in the charity's old building, her standing beside a cash ledger stamped in red. 3 photos, 3 moments, 3 contexts, spliced into a perfect lie if they landed in the hands of a wave-chasing editor. In minutes, Eva understood she had been tracked step by step and that the final net was closing. Rather than slip away quietly, she decided to drop the curtain her way. Stepping onto the stage, calling for the public audit presentation Vanessa had arranged, inviting representatives present to cross-verify integrity hashes, and delivering a statement cool as a lake before a storm, that any image not accompanied by its original metadata was a cheap puzzle piece. Her poise made the people behind the scenes hesitate just long enough for Isaiah to display an annex of the cash flow screen, where a timestamp edit was visible to the naked eye, if you knew where to look. That moment wasn't a victory. It was an anchor, but it kept the boat from capsizing that night. When the guests dispersed and Fairmont Crest returned to lake winds and the whisper of fir needles, Eva and Isaiah stood at opposite ends of the same question. Was their love fate, or a tragic collision engineered in advance? If fate, then every trial was merely destiny's way of annealing them into less breakable versions of themselves. If contrivance, Any sweet moment could be leverage for a killing blow. The answer didn't arrive as a rapturous thought, but through the concrete choices they had made. Isaiah chose truth over exploiting Eva's blind spots. Eva chose confrontation over retreat. Vanessa and Joey chose to intervene with the weapon of transparency instead of backroom deals. Jacob chose disclosure over absolute obedience. Those choices didn't erase danger. They altered its shape, from a knife at the throat to a shadow at the heels. But seeing the shadow clearly made them harder to lead by the nose. At Fairmont Crest, no love is just love. Every bond is a contract with risk. Eva understood that, and if she still moved toward Isaiah, it meant accepting that fear would walk beside her. Like carrying a pocket knife you never intend to use, only to remember you retain the right to defend yourself. After that night, negative repercussions arrived as the natural consequence. A donor canceled support permanently, citing a refusal to be caught in controversy. A former collaborator emailed to remove their name from past projects. A media acquaintance, hungry for exclusives, posted cropped portions of the photos to test the waters, sending comments boiling like oil. Isaiah was summoned to a nameless meeting where the old guard placed 2 one-way tickets before him. Disappear tonight, or serve as a waste channel one more time in exchange for an amicable arrangement. He tore the tickets, not because he believed himself untouchable, but because he now understood the rules. Once you accept the ticket, the hand is shown. The act triggered retaliation. One of his financial accounts was briefly frozen for suspicious logins. An unmarked car idled past his home at odd hours, and a neighbor suddenly remembered seeing Isaiah near the docks the night a document vanished. The soft blows continued, bleeding him from within with the community's suspicion. Elsewhere, Jacob faced inward questions. Why did the leak open exactly where only a few had access? He neither denied nor confessed. He chose strategic silence and sent one more document, this time an access map that could reveal who actually opened the back door. It was his first step into a zone from which he might not return. The story was not finished when dawn laid a thin layer of silver over the lake and Fairmont Crest shook itself like a great beast emerging from rain. At this point, no one remained who they had been. Eva was no longer merely a woman reclaiming the feeling of being cherished, but someone who knew how to turn that cherishing into discipline to protect herself and the person she chose to trust. Isaiah was no longer a passing shadow, but a man willing to shoulder it under everyone's gaze, accepting every judgment to keep his path straight. Joey and Vanessa were no longer just survivors at the brink. They were rewriting the rules with a cutting transparency. Jacob stood on a thin line between atonement and being swallowed whole. Each step he took now printed clear footprints on wet ground, visible, undeniable. And at the center, the original question returned like a compass needle that refused to drift. Did Isaiah come for a mission, to flee, or as part of a plot? Perhaps all were true at different times, but the deciding factor would be the endpoint. Would he leave as an expendable tool or stay as a witness-turned-teller, fixer, finisher? And Eva, could she distinguish truth from lies sugar-coated as love? There was no absolute certainty, but she chose the sole way to keep the inner scales from shattering. Let truth manifest through a chain of actions and, when necessary, put herself in the position that forces truth to appear. If their love was fate, it would survive every layer of verification. If it was a tragic accident arranged by destiny, that very process would expose the puppeteer's hand. Either way, they would decide how the story was written, not by nocturnal vows, but by the footprints stamped along Fairmont Crest's damp stone corridors each morning, where every step carried the echo of a choice weighed to the very end.